Hi, I'm Julia LaRoche, correspondent for Yahoo Finance, and today we're going to explore the new rules of capitalism with none other than Josh Brown, the CEO of Ritholtz Wealth Management, and Barry Ritholtz, the CIO of Ritholtz Wealth Management. I'm so happy to be here with you guys. It's going to be so much fun talking capitalism. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having us.
We're for capitalism.
Yeah, we're
in favor.
I figured as much. It's interesting because it seems like the younger generation, maybe my generation, the millennials, they don't have as favorable a view of capitalism. They feel that it's failed them in many different ways. So as folks who are pro-capitalist, unpack why you're for it, and then we can start to explore some of the changes that need to be made. Barry, we'll start with you.
Sure. So what's the old joke? If you're not a liberal in your 20s, you have no heart. And if you're not a conservative in your 50s, you have no mind. The young have been left of center throughout most of history. It's not a surprise. They look at a system that seems to continually have problems as our economy becomes more and more mature. The crony capitalists, not real capitalists, but crony capitalists, have found ways to game the system in their own favor. And that certainly is problematic for youth. When you look at the issues in the United States that most other industrialized nations have already figured out, Western democracies, things like paying for college education and healthcare, we lag the rest of the world in that space. So of course the youth is not happy with capitalism. It isn't working very well for them.
Josh?
I actually don't think it's capitalism that they're against. I think what they don't like is a calcified system where the circumstances of your birth have a huge impact on where you end up as an adult because of these different tracks that we seem to be on throughout society. I think they sense the unfairness of it. I do think that they are in favor of capitalism if there were equal opportunity for everyone, but there really isn't. So it's not that everyone isn't free to choose and live their life the way they want to. And in our system, it's not that people can't make something of themselves. It's just that some people automatically start 300 yards ahead of everyone else before the gun is fired. And there are a lot of reasons for that. It's not the fault of the current generation. This has been going on for a long time. I think once people get themselves into the top 1% or the top 10%, in order to stay there, the actions they take, and in order to keep their kids there, more importantly, the actions they take end up functionally looking like pulling the ladder up behind themselves. And there are a million examples, from real estate to financial planning to university admissions, and we could go on and on about why it seems like there's a caste system and it's perpetuating itself. But I think that's really what young people dislike. I don't think it's the idea of free enterprise, free capitalism.
Yeah, you guys brought up a lot of interesting points. And before I move on, I just want to say to our viewers out there, feel free to ask questions or comment in the comment section. These are things that we will bring up throughout the conversation. Josh and Barry, both of you guys mentioned higher education, university education, for example. And I think this is something that people are starting to question now when you're seeing more and more move to online education, like the value of a degree when you're paying $50,000, $60,000 a year for college, when maybe you could democratize that. What do you make of the future of higher education as it relates to our capitalist system?
Go ahead, Josh, you start.
I just think it's a function of what you believe is the true benefit of going to university. So if you actually think it's just the education, then moving to an online system wouldn't bother you at all. I happen to think that most parents in the middle class view killing themselves to send their kids to a private school or a very expensive out-of-state school. I think they think that a lot of the benefit of that is networking, the kids meeting people that will one day provide opportunities for them, or that will give them the self-esteem of their place in the world so that they enter the workforce. They can walk out of Emory or University of Michigan and they can proudly proclaim that I went to University of Michigan. So I think that parents instinctively know that that's part of the allure of spending money on schools like that. So I talk to a lot of people in my town who have college-age children. This is a perfect moment to really decide what's the value of college. They're being told by the schools their kids were accepted by to make the tuition payment because the kids are going to come from September to November when flu season starts. They're all very suspicious. They think the school's going to collect the money, maybe have the kids come for a month. If there's a resurgence of the virus, send all the kids home and keep the tuition dollars. And then tell the kids, guess what? You're on e-learning. So a lot of the parents are nervous. And these are people sending their children to University of Miami, and good schools. So this is a really interesting moment. We're going to see how much people care about the in-person experience versus just get the credits, just get the knowledge.
I'm a big fan of Professor Scott Galloway and NYU Stern's suggestion. If ever there was a year to take a gap year and go do something else and wait a year, even if you're already in school, take a year off. This is a year to do it, because by this time in 2021, we should have some form of a vaccine that will be fairly widely available and some improvement. You look at how much the treatment is being getting better and better once you're infected. Taking a year off and doing something else. Unfortunately, you can't go to Europe.
What are you doing with it? What are you doing with a gap year in Corona times? More Netflix?
Australia, Asia.
They don't want us. They don't want us there.
They don't want us in Europe. Elsewhere, if you come from a state like New York that has wrestled the coronavirus into submission, that's great. But to pay, there was a great thing circulating on Reddit, different streaming costs for the year, and it costs you about $108 for Netflix and $132 for Hulu and $112,000 for Harvard. That's a terrible buy for 2 semesters of streaming classes. So if you have the option of not going to college for a year, find something to do, because this is going to be a waste of time.
Yeah, it'd be interesting, especially if you could find something in the volunteer world or do something good for someone rather than just sit on your couch. It'll be interesting to watch the enrollment numbers and then to see what colleges ultimately do. I mean, there got to be some out there that are probably struggling financially and they need to fill those dorm rooms. And I don't know.
Julia, if you had a college bound, so if you had a kid that just graduated high school, was on their way, name the school, like whatever, and and they said to you, you know what, this is going to be distance learning on the internet, but it's the same tuition, would you pay it?
I don't think so.
That is like one of the fundamental questions right now.
Yeah, I really enjoyed my in-person on college campus experience, and I feel like the tuition, even though I felt like the tuition was expensive when I was there 10 years ago, it was almost like, well, I'm paying also for the experience that I'm getting versus I'm not someone who can sit in front of a computer per se and have a great experience. That's just me. But
one other thing though, the college educated unemployment rate, even during this pandemic, is significantly lower than the non-college educated. And when you think about the nature of the jobs that have been lost during this crisis, for the most part, it's not people that earned a 4-year degree. It's people that didn't and work on the front lines in the hospitality, travel, leisure industries. And it's really unfortunate. These are like the people that can least afford to not have a job.
Yeah, so that also brings up an interesting point to segue the conversation is, do we need a fundamental rethink of our economy? Because when you look at our GDP, it's 70% consumer, and then the bulk of it is also, the services sector, the services industry. Do we need to start to rethink what kind of economy we want to have here?
So that 70% number is a little misleading because it includes healthcare, which is a giant slug of it. But keep in mind, when we're discussing the new rules of capitalism, we are continually going through a process of creative destruction. And when you look at what's been taking place over the past, not even 3 months, but 3 decades, the economics of the world have changed. The technology world has changed how we do business. We all have Zoom fatigue. I can't imagine college students dealing with a whole semester or a whole year of Zoom classes. But that's just an example of one of the many ways that we're constantly rebooting what we're doing in the economy. And the answer to why capitalism is simply, it's the most efficient way to bring consumers and producers together that the world has found. Creative destruction is a huge part of that.
Good point. How about just the role of government in capitalism, and maybe the role in the relationship between the government and the private sector? How do you see that, even as we come through this pandemic, kind of starting to change, or maybe even people's perceptions of that changing? Because I think people are realizing that it's necessary that there's this like symbiotic relationship between the two.
Well, we know a couple of things. The first is that it's a pendulum, and the role of government in business, in capitalism, swings back and forth, and it always goes too far in both directions. So what we've been experiencing in the last 3 years is a corrective swing away from the government being heavily involved in every aspect and every decision. So now you can make the argument, well, we've swung too far away from reasonable regulation. Now we're back to, let's take a chainsaw to the rule books. So we do, like, I'm only in the business world for 20 years, which is not a long time. And I've already seen 4 versions of this. I saw the George W. Bush deregulation era. I saw the consequences of that, which then Obama came in and cleaned up. Then he went too far for the tastes of business people. Now it's swinging back the other way. I don't know what the reaction is after Trump, but I'm guessing it'll be more government, not less. I don't think less would even be possible. So you're just going to see that throughout the course of your life, and no one will ever agree. This is exactly where the pendulum should stop, right? We will never all say, this is the perfect amount of regulation, exactly where it is right now. Stop swinging. So get used to that traveling back and forth. But the other thing that we know, again, definitively, when we look at academic studies of the history of the world's stock market returns and every country and every era, we know that in countries with a strong rule of law and property rights and enough market regulation so that there's trust, we know that those markets are the most successful, both for capitalism and real business, but also for investors and for the most part for workers. So this idea that, oh, I want this free market paradise where the rational consumer decides everything and government stays, well, that exists. It's called Mogadishu. You can go there and there are no laws. And if you see a parcel of land that you like, you can buy the biggest guns and the most powerful militia and you can go take it. And if somebody is able to get bigger guns and even more soldiers, they could take it back from you. And that's a free market with no rules whatsoever. You can enjoy that. For most of us here, I think we want enough rules so that people don't feel cheated every day when they wake up, but not so many rules or such onerous layers of rules that it's actually worth starting a business. So I actually think that we've done a better job than Europe in that regard. But they've done a better job in areas like healthcare. And it's always going to be a back and forth. And everyone's not ever going to agree on exactly where it should stop.
Let me give a historical perspective of the relationship between the private sector and the government, because since 1980 or so, that has changed. But the previous few hundred years has been a very robust partnership between the government and enabling various businesses to innovate and create new products. One of the reasons the U.S. economy did so well in the 18th and 19th century is the patent rules here were vastly superior to those in the UK and Europe. And if you look at how the US funded not just the railroads through eminent domain, Congress literally funded the very first telegraph, and that eventually led to telephones and wireless and on the road, down the road. If you look at the history of that private-public partnership, and there's a wonderful book called Americana, 400 Years of Capitalism, that explains this. Up until fairly recently, the government has worked hand in hand with giving new technologies some room through the patent laws, helping out new products. When you look at the internet, just the fact that we're doing what we're doing, that came out of DARPA, which was out of the Department of Defense. If you look at all the technologies, the semiconductor came out of research from NASA and other parts of the space program. Ignoring the opportunities that a private-public partnership creates has been a big mistake over the past 40, 50 years. We're turning our back on something that's been very successful. And to China's credit, they are doing what we did. And if we don't wake up, we're going to cede leadership in technology and economic influence and military influence because we're turning our back on our own success story and eating our seed corn.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, Barry, to bring up, just like what the consequences could be down the road, especially when you look at and think about the status of the U.S. So we really only have a few minutes left, and just something I want to explore with both of you guys, just maybe from the investor perspective or even from your executive experience, talking with business leaders and CEOs, the both of you. We've seen a number of vulnerabilities within the system and inequities highlighted because of the health crisis, the economic crisis, and the social crisis that we're going through. We've seen a lot of companies come out with statements and various actions and this kind of bigger theme of stakeholder capitalism that's been talked about since the Business Roundtable letter from last fall. Do you all think that we will see fundamental changes when it comes to capitalism? And do you think that we'll see more than just lip service from companies, that we'll actually see meaningful changes? And what do you think those changes might look like?
I would just say that I think there's a generational changeover in the leadership in corporate America. And it used to be, don't say anything, don't offend anyone. We want 100% of the people to be our customers. And that used to be the way I think corporations communicated with the public. They wanted to be as innocuous and as neutral as possible. And now what's changing is after that horrific wave of shootings that we saw with Las Vegas and the nightclub in Miami, and I'm sure there were 12 others, Dick's Sporting Goods basically said, look, that's it. We're not going to sell rifles. We're not going to sell these types of guns. We understand it's going to upset a certain percentage of our customers, but we're making this calculated decision that if we're viewed as being part of the solution of just having less guns, period, that it'll in the end it'll all wash out and it'll come out in favor of us. That's they obviously made a corporate decision. I'd like to say that they made a decision based on their heart, but I doubt it. I think and that's now been taken a step further multiple times. Nike put up a billboard with Colin Kaepernick 2 years before this whole recent Black Lives Matter summer that we're having. And it looks really prescient from the 2020 lens looking back. But when they did it, there was, forget the outrage, I'm saying there was shock. There were people like, wow, Nike is picking a side. So I think you're going to see more of that. And I think it's genuine. I think it comes from the fact that it's a new generation of leaders. Love it or hate it, there are now a leadership core at large companies who are not afraid to say, yes, I actually think this is good versus evil, or I think this is right versus wrong. And I'm going to stake my company on the fact that enough people agree with that we will not only not lose we will net gain, because we're going to build loyalty among the majority of our customers who are already where we're going. So I think you're going to see more of it. I understand some of it's controversial, but I think on balance, it is meaningful. It's not lip service.
So Josh and I mostly agree on this. I think the bottom line is still the bottom line, and companies are doing this. Look no further than the Washington Redskins dropping their racist name Redskins.
They had no choice.
It wasn't because Snyder suddenly realized, right, oh, this is really offensive. It's because Walmart and FedEx said, we're done with you guys, not because we think it's right, but we're going to lose too many clients. We're going to lose too many customers. And I love the Nike call a couple of years ago. Scott Galloway talked about this on the podcast. I wrote about this, but keep in mind, the vast majority of Nike's customer base are people under 35 and people overseas. And so it wasn't that they were bucking their audience. They were playing directly to their client base. And directly what Josh suggested, corporate governments are going to, governance, not governments, but corporate governance increasingly has to be aware of ESG and who their customers are, because most people have been mocking it as woke capitalism, but it's not. People are realizing if we're going to offend our core audience base, they're going to leave us. And not to get political, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the various Trump Organization properties post his presidency, whenever that happens to be. I suspect a lot of people are going to have difficulty being a client of Trump, given the pushback we've seen over the past few months. Now extrapolate that throughout corporate America.
Interesting stuff. And maybe those are the new rules of capitalism that we'll see going forward. Barry and Josh, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it, guys.
Good to see you, Julia.
You
Thank
too.
you.